The day before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen making pumpkin pie from my late wife's recipe when my son called. He sighed and said, "Dad, don't come tomorrow. My wife thinks you'll make her guests uncomfortable." That night I checked social media and froze. My daughter-in-law was proudly serving my wife's pie, calling it our family's secret recipe. 3 days later, they demanded $18,400 from me. I sent exactly $1, then changed every lock on my house. I am so grateful to have you here on Silent Sweet Revenge. Where are you watching from today? Type your city or country below to join the conversation. Please note this story uses fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Resemblances to specific names or settings are coincidental, but the message I am conveying is highly useful. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had somewhere to be. At 68 years old and 3 years into retirement, I rarely had somewhere to be. I woke up early because I was excited, the kind of quiet, private excitement that old men carry alone, the kind that doesn't need an audience. I had pumpkin pie to make, Margaret's recipe. The one she never once wrote down in 31 years of marriage, the one she carried entirely in her hands, and her nose and some instinct I never fully understood. After she passed 6 years ago, I spent 2 full Thanksgivings trying to reconstruct it from memory. Too much nutmeg the first year. Not enough brown sugar the second. By the third, I had it close enough that when Ethan took his first bite, he set down his fork and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked up and said, "That's Mom's pie, Dad." And I had to turn toward the window so he wouldn't see my face. I pulled the cans of pumpkin puree from the pantry shelf, lined them up next to the evaporated milk, the eggs, the worn wooden spoon Margaret had used so many times. The handle had darkened to almost black. The kitchen smelled like November, the way it always had, radiator heat and coffee, and the faint sweetness of cinnamon before it even hits the bowl. I'd already wrapped Connor's gift. My grandson, 9 years old, had mentioned once, maybe 6 weeks ago, just in passing, that he wanted a particular model train set. I'd written it down on a slip of paper the same day and ordered it that evening. Lily, his little sister at 6, was easier. She wanted anything purple and anything that sparkled. I found both in one gift. I was proud of that. I set the wrapped boxes near the front door where I wouldn't forget them. It was a good morning. The kind that reminded me why I liked November despite everything. Around 11, I started on the pie crust. I was pressing the dough into the pan. Margaret always said you had to do it with your palms, never a rolling pin, never rush it, when my cell phone rang on the counter. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and picked up Ethan's name on the screen. I felt my chest loosen a little. Good. I'd been meaning to ask what time he wanted me there tomorrow, whether I should bring anything else besides the pie. "Hey, son." "Hey, Dad." His voice had something in it. A flatness. I'd heard that voice before, usually when he was about to tell me something he'd already decided and didn't want to argue about. "You got a minute?" "Got all the time in the world. I'm making the pie." A pause. "Right. Yeah." Another pause, longer this time, the kind that made my hands go still against the edge of the counter. "Listen, Dad, I need to talk to you about tomorrow." "Okay." "Chloe's been putting a lot into this dinner this year. She's invited some people, her colleagues, a few neighbors, some of the couples we've been getting to know from the neighborhood association." He exhaled. "It's kind of a bigger thing than usual." "How many people?" I asked. My voice came out steady. I wasn't sure how. "Maybe 15, 20. She wants it to feel like a real event, you know. More formal." "That sounds nice." I meant it. I pulled a kitchen chair out and sat down because my legs had decided they didn't want to stand anymore. "The thing is, Dad..." He stopped. Started again. "Chloe thinks, and I think she has a point, that this year it might be better if it was, a little more curated, in terms of the guest mix. Another pause. She's worried that some of her business contacts might feel she just wants the energy to be a certain way. I looked at the unbaked pie crust in the pan in front of me. The dough still had the impression of my thumbprints along the edges. Ethan, I kept my voice level. Are you telling me not to come? He didn't answer right away, and that answer was its own answer. It's not personal, Dad. It's just this year the way she's planned it. Is it the way I dress? The question came out before I could stop it, and I immediately wished I could take it back. Not because it was wrong, because I already knew the answer, and hearing it out loud was going to cost me something. Dad, or is it what I talk about? Because I know I go on about the old job sometimes. The city work, the wiring contracts. My voice had gone rough at the edges. I cleared my throat. I know that's not interesting to everyone. It's not about that. But his voice dropped on the last word in a way that told me it was exactly about that, at least in part. All right, Ethan. I said it quietly. 2 words. No anger in them because the anger hadn't arrived yet. What had arrived was something heavier and slower, a kind of ache that started behind the sternum and spread outward. Dad, I'm sorry. Next year it's all right. I said it again because I needed somewhere to put the conversation that wasn't an argument. You go ahead with your plans. I'll be fine. You sure? I'm sure. Give the kids my love. I set the phone face down on the counter. For a long moment I sat there, with both hands flat on the table, feeling the grain of the wood under my palms. This table Margaret and I had bought at an estate sale 24 years ago. This table where Ethan had done his homework every night through middle school, where we'd eaten 10,000 ordinary dinners, where Margaret had sat the morning after her diagnosis and said to me very calmly, "We're going to handle this together, Richard." Same as everything else. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with it. I stood up, walked back to the counter, picked up the wooden spoon. Because the pie still needed finishing, and the cinnamon still needed measuring, and the oven still needed preheating. Because that was what you did. You kept going. Margaret had taught me that too. I slid the pie into the oven and set the timer. Then I carried the 2 wrapped gifts for Connor and Lily back to the spare bedroom and set them on the shelf. I'd find another time to give them. By 4 in the afternoon, the pie was cooling on the wire rack by the window. It smelled exactly like every Thanksgiving I'd ever known. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen looking at it, and I thought, well, there it is. I didn't know yet what that evening would bring. I didn't know that by 9 o'clock I'd be sitting in the living room with my phone in my hand, looking at something that would turn that particular ache into something sharper, something that didn't spread out slowly, but cut clean. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down to wait for nothing in particular. Outside, the November sky had gone the color of old pewter, and the neighbors' kids were raking leaves in the last of the afternoon light, their voices carrying through the glass, bright and uncomplicated. I watched them for a while. I drank my coffee. And then just after dark, my phone lit up on the end table. A notification from Ethan's wife's social media. I almost didn't look. I looked. I want to tell you that I scrolled past it, that I had enough self-respect to put the phone down and go to bed like a sensible man. I did not do that. The first photograph loaded slowly, the way images do on older phones, top to bottom colors bleeding into shape. I recognized the living room at Ethan and Chloe's house immediately. The double-height ceilings, the pendant lights they'd had installed last spring. The long oak dining table that Chloe had picked out, and that I'd helped carry up 2 flights of stairs on a Saturday afternoon without being asked. The table was set beautifully. Candles, cloth napkins folded into little fans, a centerpiece made of dried wheat and orange flowers, and people, so many people. I counted without meaning to. It was an electrician's habit. You walk into a room, you assess. 22, maybe more. A cluster of women near the fireplace with glasses of wine, all of them in dresses that probably cost more than my truck payment. Men in blazers with their sleeves rolled up, the studied, casual look of people who had definitely planned to look unstudied. A young man I didn't recognize at all, maybe 30, grinning at something Chloe was saying. The caption identified him as Tyler, our incredible wellness coach who keeps this family sane. I read the words, "this family," twice. My thumb moved to the next photo before I could stop it. That one was of the food table. Roasted turkey, glazed sweet potatoes, 3 or 4 salads arranged in a way that looked like a magazine spread. Chloe stood at the center of the frame in a burgundy dress, hair-perfect smile wider than I'd ever seen it in the 11 years she'd been my daughter-in-law. And there, right at the front of the table, set on a white ceramic stand, like it was the centerpiece of the whole evening, a pumpkin pie. Golden brown, smooth across the top, the slight caramel dark edge around the crust that only happens when you get the sugar ratio exactly right. The exact same pie I'd made that morning, cooling alone on a wire rack in my kitchen on Maple Ridge Road. I sat forward in my chair. Chloe's caption read, "So grateful for this beautiful evening with incredible people, made with love using our family's secret recipe, passed down through generations. Some traditions are worth holding on to. Our family's secret recipe." I pressed my thumb against the corner of the screen until my knuckle went white. Margaret had learned that recipe from her own grandmother. She'd adjusted it over 30 years. Small changes, a pinch of cardamom in the last decade, a different ratio of brown sugar to white. She'd taught it to no one, said she'd write it down someday, kept putting it off, and then time ran out before she could. I'd reconstructed it from memory, ingredient by ingredient, failed batch by failed batch, because forgetting it felt like losing one more piece of her. 18 months ago, Chloe had asked me to make the pie at their house for Christmas. She'd stood next to me at the counter, asking questions the whole time. How much cinnamon? What's the oven temperature? Why evaporated milk and not regular? I'd answered every one. Patiently, happily. I'd thought she was curious. I'd thought she wanted to learn. "Dad," I said out loud to no one in the quiet of my living room. "You absolute fool." My eyes burned. Not tears, not yet, just that hot pressure behind them that comes before the kind that builds in your throat and your sinuses at once and makes swallowing feel like work. I kept scrolling because apparently I had decided to finish what I'd started. A video short, maybe 40 seconds. Chloe moving through the room laughing, turning the camera to catch different faces. And then a moment, maybe she forgot the camera was on, maybe she didn't care, where she stopped near the entrance to the hallway and spoke to 2 women I didn't recognize. "Is his father not here?" one of them asked. A polite question. Innocent. Chloe's smile shifted into something softer, a little apologetic. "Oh, we've had a complicated few months with him. He's at a stage in life where big gatherings aren't really comfortable for him anymore. He tends to get a bit—" She tilted her head, searched for the word, overwhelmed. "And honestly, he still talks about rewiring circuit breakers at the dinner table." She laughed, light and easy. "You know how it is." The 2 women laughed too. I pressed stop. My hands were shaking. Not rage shaking, not the shaking you see in movies where the man slams his fist on the table. More like the way your hands shake after you've been gripping something too tightly for too long, and you finally let go, fine tremors, almost invisible, the kind your body does when it's processing something your mind is still a few seconds behind on. Ethan was visible in the background of the shot, standing maybe 6 feet from Chloe, glass in hand, talking to another man. close enough to hear every word she'd just said. He did not look over. He did not turn. He went right on talking. I set the phone on the end table face down. The living room was very quiet. The furnace ticked the way it always did in November, the rhythmic knock of old pipes doing what old pipes do. On the mantel, the framed photograph of Margaret and me at Niagara Falls, 1998. The one where we're both squinting into the sun and laughing at something neither of us could remember afterward. The way you laugh at 41 when the future is still something you're walking toward together. I pressed the heel of my hand against my chest. Not because anything was wrong medically, just because it helped somehow. Pressure against the place that hurt. They had a recipe on the table, Margaret, I said to the photograph. My voice came out rough and too loud for the room. Introduced it as their own. I exhaled. A long, slow, ragged thing. I didn't know what I was going to do about any of it. The pie, the party, the 22 people, the wellness coach, the 30 years of Thanksgiving tradition that had just appeared in a social media post under someone else's name. I didn't know yet. What I did know was that I was 68 years old. I was retired. I had 2 wrapped Christmas presents sitting in the spare bedroom for grandchildren who had been told I was too sick to come to dinner. I knew that because the next morning, my phone would ring before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. And the voice on the other end would be 9 years old and worried in the pure, uncomplicated way that children are worried when the adults in their lives have told them something that doesn't feel right. I just didn't know that yet. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a while. Margaret kept 6 potted plants on the kitchen windowsill. African violets, mostly, with one stubborn little succulent she'd rescued from a clearance rack at the hardware store and named Gerald. I'd kept every one of them alive for 6 years through nothing but stubbornness and a watering schedule I wrote on a Post-it note and taped to the cabinet door. Gerald had actually started thriving, which Margaret would have found deeply satisfying and slightly hilarious. I was misting the violets Friday morning when my iPad pinged on the counter. A FaceTime call. I leaned over to check the screen and felt something loosen in my chest when I saw the name Connor. My grandson. 9 years old, 3rd grade, obsessed with anything mechanical and deeply convinced that his grandfather was the most interesting person he knew, which I had done absolutely nothing to discourage. I dried my hands and picked up. His face filled the screen, round cheeks, his father's eyes a smear of what looked like peanut butter at the corner of his mouth that he was apparently unaware of. "Hey, buddy," I smiled. I meant it too, the way you only mean a smile when it catches you off guard. "Happy day after Thanksgiving." "Hi, Grandpa." He scrunched his nose. "Are you feeling better?" I felt the smile hold on my face even as something went still underneath it. "Feeling better," I said carefully. "What do you mean, bud? Dad said you were sick." Connor shifted the iPad, and I caught a glimpse of what looked like his bedroom ceiling. "He said you had something contagious, and that's why you couldn't come. He said we couldn't even hug you, or we might get sick too." The African violet meister was still in my hand. I set it down on the counter with great deliberate care, the way you set something down when your hands have started to feel unreliable. "Connor." I kept my voice light, easy, warm, the voice I used when I was explaining something complicated without wanting to scare him. "I want you to listen to me, okay? I'm not sick. I feel completely fine. I've been perfectly healthy." His brow furrowed. He was 9, but he wasn't a simple 9. "Then why didn't you come?" My throat tightened until swallowing took real effort. "Your dad and I had a mix-up," I said. "Adult stuff. Nothing you need to worry about. I'm going to bring your Christmas present by soon, all right? The one you're going to really like." His face brightened immediately, the way only a child's face can that full body shift from worried to delighted, no transition required. Is it the train set? I laughed, and it came from somewhere real. You'll have to wait and see, Grandpa. He leaned closer to the camera, suddenly serious again, in the way kids get when they've decided something is important. I missed you yesterday. My eyes burned hot and sudden. I blinked hard, pressed my lips together until the feeling passed enough for me to speak. I missed you too, bud, I said. More than you know. After we hung up, I stood at the counter for a long moment, both palms flat against the tile, staring at nothing in particular. The violets needed another spray. Gerald sat in his corner looking improbably healthy. Ethan had told his own children, Connor and Lily, that I was contagious, that they couldn't come near me, that my absence at the table had a medical explanation, clean and simple, no questions needed. He hadn't stumbled into that story by accident. You don't accidentally describe symptoms and contagion to a 9-year-old. You think about it first. You choose it. I picked up my phone and opened Chloe's social media page. The video was still there, the same 40-second clip I had watched the night before, the one where Chloe told 2 women I didn't recognize that I got overstimulated at gatherings and still talked about electrical panels at the dinner table. I watched it again. This time I watched Ethan. He was 6 feet away in the background, glass in hand, mid-conversation with another man, close enough to hear every word she said. He did not look over. He did not pause. He went right on talking and laughing like a man without a care in the world. Something broke open inside my chest, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way old wood cracks in cold weather. A quiet, splitting sound that only you can hear. This was not a man caught in the middle between his wife and his father. This was a man who had made a choice, made it deliberately, and was now simply living inside it. I put the phone down, walked to the kitchen table, and pulled out a chair and sat down. Outside, the Friday morning neighborhood was doing what Friday morning neighborhoods do, was backing a car out of a driveway. A dog was barking, 2 houses down. The world was moving forward, entirely unconcerned with what was happening in my kitchen. I thought about what to do next. Not in the dramatic sense, no ultimatums forming, no speeches rehearsing themselves in the back of my mind. Just the practical question of a 68-year-old man alone in his kitchen on the day after Thanksgiving. What do you do now? I decided to do nothing. Not yet. I would wait. I would see if Ethan called, if an apology came. I gave it 3 days. He called on the 3rd day, and an apology was the last thing he had in mind. 3 days of quiet passed the way December mornings pass in Dayton, gray skies, bare trees, the particular stillness of a neighborhood that has already packed away its holiday decorations and is now just waiting for winter to get on with it. I told myself Ethan would call when he was ready. I believed it mostly. And then Tuesday afternoon, while I was reheating soup at the stove, my phone rang. His name on the screen. I turned the burner down and picked up before the second ring because whatever I was feeling, I was still his father, and fathers pick up. Hey, Ethan. Dad. His voice was flat. Not angry flat. Business flat. The tone of a man delivering information he has already organized into bullet points. I need to talk to you about something. All right. I pulled the pot off the heat entirely and leaned against the counter. Go ahead. We're behind on the mortgage. No preamble, no lead-in. Just the fact dropped onto the conversation, like something heavy set down on a glass table. 3 months behind. With the late fees and the property tax payment that's due, we're looking at $18,400. We need it by Friday, or the bank starts the formal default process. I did not speak right away. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was doing the math, and the math was doing something unpleasant to the back of my throat. "What happened to the payments?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "We had some unexpected costs come up." He said it the way people say things they've decided not to elaborate on. "What kind of costs, Ethan?" "Just things came up. The dinner was expensive. We had some other commitments." A pause. "Dad, I don't have time to go through all of it right now. We need the money by Friday." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against my ear. A text incoming while we were still on the call. I pulled the phone away long enough to glance at the screen. Chloe. Her message read, "You co-signed the loan 4 years ago. That means this is your legal obligation too. If the mortgage goes into default, it doesn't just hurt us, it damages your credit score as well. We need the transfer by Friday. This is not optional." I read it twice. Then I set the phone back against my ear. Here is something most people don't fully understand about co-signing a loan. When you put your name on someone else's mortgage as a guarantor, you are telling the bank that if the primary borrower stops paying, you will cover it. Your credit history, your financial standing, your name, all of it becomes tied to that loan. Chloe wasn't wrong about the mechanics. She was absolutely right that a default would land on my record. What she was counting on was that I wouldn't stop to think about the rest of it. "Ethan," I said, "I'm going to need you to let me call you back." "Dad, I'll call you back." I kept my voice even, measured, the way I used to speak on job sites when something had gone wrong and panic wasn't going to help anyone. "Give me a little while." I hung up. Set the phone on the table, and then I opened my banking app, not to transfer anything, but to look at something I hadn't looked at in a long time. 3 years of transactions, every time Ethan had called with a need, and I had found a way to say yes. Roof repair on the Oakwood house, $12,000. Credit card balance that was just a temporary thing, $4,300. New kitchen appliances because the old ones came with the house and were embarrassing, $6,800. Small things, too. Grocery runs when they were a little short. Car registration. A weekend trip that Chloe had already booked before they realized they couldn't cover it. The total sat at the bottom of my rough calculation like a stone. $72,000, give or take. Not including the $120,000 for the down payment. Not including the years I'd stood as their co-signer, keeping my own credit clean so theirs could stay afloat. I set the phone face down on the kitchen table. Then I looked up at the small framed photo Margaret had kept on the windowsill, the two of us at Ethan's college graduation, standing on either side of him, all three of us squinting into the sun. Ethan was 22 in that picture, grinning like a man who had just been handed the rest of his life. "What would you do?" I said to her, out loud the way I sometimes did when the kitchen felt too quiet. "What would you tell me right now?" She didn't answer, obviously, but I knew Margaret well enough to know that she would not have told me to transfer the money by Friday. She would have told me to think clearly. She would have said, "Richard, don't react. Assess." So I sat at that table and I assessed, and what I began to understand slowly, the way cold water finds its level, was that something about this situation did not add up. 3 months of missed mortgage payments, while they hosted a 20-person Thanksgiving dinner with catered presentation and a wellness coach. 3 months of silence while the bank apparently sent notifications I never received. I was going to need to make some phone calls, but not to Ethan, not yet. Tomorrow morning, I was going to the bank. I have spent 31 years as an electrician. You learn things in that line of work that stay with you long after you've hung up the tool belt. The most important one is this: before you touch anything, you check the circuit. You do not assume. You do not go on instinct. You verify. So Wednesday morning, I put on my good coat, drove 12 minutes to the First Horizon branch on Far Hills Avenue, and asked to speak with Helen Brooks. Helen had worked at that branch for going on 19 years. She and her husband used to live 2 streets over from Margaret and me before they moved out to Centerville, and we'd crossed paths enough times over the decades that there was a comfortable familiarity between us. The kind that doesn't require catching up every time, just a nod and a mutual understanding that you're both people who keep their word. She handled the paperwork when Margaret and I refinanced years back, and she'd been the loan officer who processed Ethan's mortgage 4 years ago when I came in to co-sign. When I told the front desk I needed to see her, the young woman at the counter went back and returned in under 2 minutes. Helen came out herself, hand extended, reading my face with the particular calm of someone who has spent 2 decades watching people walk through bank doors, carrying things they don't know how to say yet. "Richard." She shook my hand firmly. "Come on back." Her office was small and tidy, framed photos of her grandchildren on the credenza, a coffee maker on the side table that she gestured toward without asking. I poured myself a cup and sat across from her desk. "I need to look at the co-signer record on my son's mortgage," I said. "The one I signed 4 years ago. I want to know the payment history, and I want to know whether I've been receiving the bank's notifications." Helen pulled up the account on her screen without hesitation. She turned it slightly so I could see the general layout, though not the specific figures. Privacy protocols kept certain details on her side of the desk. "Payment history first," she said. Her voice was even, but her eyes moved across the screen in a way that made my stomach tighten before she even spoke. "Richard, this loan has been delinquent for 3 consecutive months. September, October, November. The total outstanding, including late fees and accrued interest, is currently—" She paused, and the pause itself told me something. "Just over $14,000. The property tax installment due in December would bring that closer to 18. "I know about the 18, I said. "My son called yesterday." Helen nodded. "What I imagine you don't know," she said carefully, "is why you weren't notified sooner." She clicked something scrolled and then stopped. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The way a person's face shifts when they find something they were already half expecting and half hoping they wouldn't. "The co-signer notification email on this account was updated approximately 4 months ago. The address currently on file is," she read it aloud, "r-lawson-1956-updates@gmail.com. I leaned forward. "That's not my email." "I didn't think so." She said it quietly. "What email do you have on record for me?" She read the one I'd had for 12 years. The one my son had helped me set up on a Sunday afternoon at this very kitchen table back when he still came over for Sunday dinners. "Who made the change?" I asked. My voice was steady. My left hand under the desk was pressing hard into my own thigh. Helen turned back to the screen. "The modification was made through the online cosigner portal," she said. "The access log shows it was authenticated through a linked phone number." She paused again. "The number on file for that authentication is," and she read it to me. It was Ethan's cell phone number. The same number I had called 200 times. The same number that had called me yesterday afternoon to ask for $18,400. The coffee cup in my right hand felt suddenly very heavy. I set it on the edge of her desk with great care because my fingers had gone the kind of numb that happens when your body is processing something your mind is still 3 steps behind on. "Helen," I said, "one more question. Is there anything in the transaction record connected to this account? Anything at all that would explain why 3 months of mortgage payments weren't made?" She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words the way careful people do when they want to be truthful, without crossing a line they're not permitted to cross. "I can tell you," she said slowly, "that the account associated with the primary borrower shows activity consistent with significant discretionary spending during the same period, the mortgage fell delinquent. I'm not able to give you specific figures or transaction details. That's the primary borrower's private information. She met my eyes directly. What I can tell you is that the October account activity included a large single purchase consistent with a vehicle acquisition, a significant one. I thought of the photo Chloe had posted in October. The white Lexus SUV in their driveway. The caption, "Finally treating ourselves." Something cold moved through my chest. "Richard." Helen folded her hands on her desk. Her voice dropped half a register the way voices do when a conversation moves from professional to personal. "I would strongly recommend you speak with an attorney before you make any financial decisions. And I want you to know," she held my gaze, "I'll be watching this account closely. If anything else comes across my desk that concerns me, I'll reach out." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it more than the words could carry. I thanked her and walked out through the lobby and into the December cold. I sat in my truck for a full 5 minutes before I started the engine. Not because I didn't know what to do, because I was letting the full shape of it settle the changed email, the delinquent payments, the SUV, the Thanksgiving party, and underneath all of it, Ethan's phone number sitting in an audit log like a signature on a confession. Someone had made very sure I wouldn't find out until it was too late. The drive home took 12 minutes. I spent 11 of them thinking. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made exactly 2 decisions. The first was to call Martin Greaves first thing in the morning. The second was that I was done waiting to understand what was happening to me. It was time to act. Martin Greaves had been my attorney for 11 years. I'd used him when Margaret and I updated our wills and again when I had a dispute with a contractor over some work done on the house roof. He was the kind of lawyer who never used 3 sentences when one would do, who never told you what you wanted to hear, and who charged a fair rate for exactly that quality. I called him Thursday morning at 8:15, and by 8:45 I had a clear picture of what I could and couldn't legally do. What I could do was more than I'd expected. As the co-signer on Ethan's mortgage, I had the right to contact the lender directly about the status of the loan. I had the right to place a notation on the account requiring in-person verification for any future changes to co-signer contact information. The credit card that had Ethan's name on it, but mine as the primary account holder, I could cancel that immediately. The emergency savings account I'd set up years ago with Ethan as an authorized user, I could revoke that access with a single phone call. None of it required a court order. None of it required Ethan's permission. I wrote down what I needed to do in the order I needed to do it. Then I opened my banking app. The transfer screen came up. Recipient Ethan Lawson. Amount field blinking and empty. I typed the number $1. And in the memo line I typed contribution from someone who is apparently not considered family. My thumb hovered over the confirm button for a long moment. Not because I was uncertain, but because I understood that once I pressed it, something between Ethan and me was going to shift in a way that couldn't be quietly walked back. I pressed it anyway. Then I called the credit card company and canceled the card with Ethan's name. I called my bank and revoked his authorized user access to the emergency account. I called First Horizon and spoke to Helen directly, requesting a security notation requiring my physical signature and government ID for any future co-signer information changes. Helen processed it without asking questions, which told me she had already been expecting this call. I had just poured a second cup of coffee when my phone rang so hard and sudden it nearly jumped off the counter. "Ethan. What is this?" His voice was hot and tight, nothing like the flat business tone from Tuesday. $1. You sent me $1. I did, I said. Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious? I heard him pull in a sharp breath. You're going to let us lose the house over a dinner, over one dinner. You're not losing the house over a dinner, Ethan. I kept my voice level and deliberate the way I used to talk men down on job sites when something had gone wrong and someone was about to make it worse. You've been behind on the mortgage for 3 months. That has nothing to do with Thanksgiving. You canceled my card. You pulled the emergency account. His voice cracked at the edges, raw and furious. Do you have any idea what you're doing to us right now? I'm doing exactly what I should have done a long time ago. That is unbelievable. A pause, and then something shifted in his voice. It went from hot to calculating, the way a fire goes from open flame to something slower and more dangerous. Fine. Fine, Dad. You want to play it this way? If we lose that house, when we lose that house, I will make sure Connor and Lily know exactly what happened. I will tell them their grandfather had the money and chose to let their family get thrown out on the street. I will make sure they know that. The words hit me like a hand around the throat. Connor. 9 years old, with peanut butter at the corner of his mouth, asking me over FaceTime if I was feeling better. Lily, 6, who called me Grandpa Rich and couldn't pronounce her R's properly yet. My grandchildren, the 2 people in this entire situation who had done absolutely nothing wrong, and Ethan had just picked them up and placed them between us like a pair of shields. My eyes burned fierce and sudden. I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen counter until I could feel the cold of the tile through my palm. Goodbye, Ethan, I said. My voice didn't shake. I am proud of that. I ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, breathing. Then I picked up the phone again and dialed a different number, a local locksmith I'd used twice before, a man named Dave who ran a one-man operation out of a shop on Wilmington Pike. Dave, it's Richard Lawson over on Maple Ridge. I need every lock in my house replaced today. Front door, back door, garage entry, the side door off the laundry room, all of it. And I want a keypad on the front. Dave was quiet for a second. Lost your keys? No, I said. I just need to decide who gets in. He arrived 2 hours later. While he worked, I went through the spare bedroom and found the house key I'd given Ethan years ago. Or rather, I found the empty hook on the keyboard where his copy used to hang before he'd taken it to make his own duplicate without mentioning it. I found the spare key under the ceramic pot by the front steps, the one I'd put there for emergencies, and I put it in my pocket instead. Dave finished just after 3 in the afternoon. He handed me 2 brand new keys, small and sharp and heavy in my palm, and said, "You're all set. Nobody gets in unless you want them to." That, I told him, is exactly the idea. After he left, I stood in the front hallway of my house. The afternoon light came in low through the side lights, and the new brass of the deadbolt caught it and threw it back warm and clean. I had lived in this house for 26 years. I had raised my son within these walls. I had brought Margaret home from her last hospital stay to this front door, and I had carried her through it when she couldn't walk on her own. For the first time in longer than I could account for, it felt entirely like mine. I didn't know yet what the next morning would bring. I thought maybe I had bought myself some time, a few days at least, to think and plan and breathe. I thought maybe Ethan would cool down, and we'd find a way to talk like adults. I was wrong on both counts. They came the very next morning, and they did not come alone. Friday morning came in cold and gray, the kind of December morning that presses down on everything. The rooftops, the bare trees, the whole quiet neighborhood, like a lid on a pot. I had made coffee and was standing at the kitchen window, watching a pair of sparrows argue over the empty bird feeder when I heard it. The sound of a key being forced into a lock that no longer fit. It was a small sound, a scrape, a rattle, the particular frustrated repetition of someone who keeps trying the same thing, expecting a different result. Then a fist against the door, not a knock, A fist, the kind that says, "I am not asking." "Dad," Ethan's voice muffled through the new steel door. "Dad, open up." I set my coffee mug on the counter and walked to the front hallway. I did not open the door. I stood close enough to hear clearly and far enough back that I could see the doorbell camera screen on my phone, which I'd pulled up the moment I heard the key. Ethan on the left, Chloe on the right, arms crossed, jaw tight, already scanning the porch and the street, the way she scanned every room for who might be watching, for how this would look. "I can hear you," I said through the door. "Then open it." Ethan's voice was strained, pulled thin over something that might have been anger or might have been something closer to shame. It was hard to tell the difference from where I was standing. "I'd rather not." "Dad, this is ridiculous." Chloe's voice cut through sharper and cleaner than Ethan's, the way a new blade cuts differently than a worn one. "Your son is standing at the door of his childhood home, and you won't let him in." "This isn't Ethan's home," I said evenly. "This is my home. It has always been my home. Ethan grew up here, which is a different thing. Some of his belongings are in that house." She was switching tactics already, I could hear it. "As the only child he has an interest in, Chloe." I said it once, flat and final. "An adult child has no legal right to enter a parent's private residence without permission. That is not how property law works in Ohio or anywhere else." A beat of surprised quiet. Then Ethan again, lower this time, almost pleading, "Dad, just come to the door. Just talk to us." "I am talking to you. Open the door and talk to us." "No." I heard Chloe exhale sharp and controlled the exhale of someone recalibrating. Then the sound of her stepping back heels on the porch boards and the distinctive tap-tap of fingers on a phone screen. "Fine," she said, and the single word was so cold and deliberate, it raised the hair on the back of my neck. "If you won't be reasonable, we'll find someone who can make you." 12 minutes later, I know because I watched the clock on the microwave, a patrol car rolled up in front of the house. 2 officers. Officer Daniels, a woman in her early 40s with the kind of face that has seen enough not to be easily surprised, and Officer Reyes, maybe 35, broad-shouldered, who hung back slightly and let his partner take the lead. I watched them on the camera screen, watched them listen to Chloe for about 90 seconds before Officer Daniels nodded once and walked toward the door. She knocked, professionally. Different sound entirely from what I'd been hearing. I opened the door. "Good morning, sir." Her eyes moved across me quickly, not rudely, just efficiently, the way someone who assesses people for a living does it without making a show of it. "I'm Officer Daniels, Dayton PD. We received a call expressing concern about your well-being. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "Not at all," I said. "Would you like to come in?" She stepped inside. Reyes stayed on the porch, positioned casually between the door and where Ethan and Chloe were standing. Smart. "Can you confirm for me that you own this property?" Daniels asked. "I can." I walked to the small desk in the hallway and retrieved the folder I'd put together yesterday, deed utility bills in my name, photo ID. I handed it to her. She reviewed it without rushing. "And you changed the locks recently?" "Yesterday afternoon. It's my house. I have the right to decide who enters." She nodded. No argument. "The individuals outside are claiming you may be experiencing some cognitive difficulties, that you've been behaving erratically." She said it without inflection, presenting the allegation the way a fair person presents something they're not yet vouching for. "Is there anything you'd like to tell me about that?" I almost smiled. "I changed my locks and sent my son a message he didn't like," I said. "I'm not sure which of those qualifies as erratic, but I'm open to the legal definition if you have one." Something moved in Officer Daniels's expression, not quite a smile, but the controlled suppression of one. She turned and stepped back onto the porch. I followed as far as the doorframe. Daniels addressed Chloe directly. "Ma'am, Mr. Lawson owns this property outright. He's demonstrated clear understanding of his circumstances and his rights. Changing one's locks and controlling access to a private residence are not indicators of incapacity." She paused. "Do you or your husband currently reside at this address?" Chloe's chin lifted. "No, but then I'm afraid there's nothing here for us to act on. Mr. Lawson hasn't committed any offense." Ethan's face crumpled at the edges like paper getting wet. He opened his mouth closed. It looked at his shoes. Chloe did not crumple. She turned toward me with the flat, burning composure of a woman who has decided that losing this particular battle does not mean losing the war. She stepped close enough that Officer Reyes shifted his weight forward slightly, paying attention, and dropped her voice to just above a whisper. "You think you've won something," she said. Her eyes were dry and perfectly steady. "You haven't. You've just made this harder than it needed to be. And you are going to regret making us look foolish in front of the whole neighborhood." She held my gaze for one more second. Then she turned, took Ethan by the arm, and walked to the car. Officer Daniels waited until they'd pulled away. Then she looked at me with an expression that had gone from professional to something more personal, the look of a woman who recognized a pattern. "Sir," she said quietly, "if anything changes or you feel unsafe, any pressure, anything unusual, please don't hesitate to call." A pause. "Some situations like this have a way of escalating before they resolve." "I appreciate that," I said. And the way she'd said it, escalating before they resolve, settled into me like a stone dropping into still water. Rings spreading outward. I closed the door, stood in the hallway with my back against it, and pressed my hand flat over my sternum, pushing back against the tight, burning weight that had taken up residence there. Chloe had said I was going to regret this. She hadn't said it like someone venting anger. She'd said it like someone reading from a plan. 2 days later, I understood what she meant. Sunday morning, I walked to the mailbox in my bathrobe. It was a habit of 30 years. Margaret used to tease me about it, mercilessly said the neighbors were going to start leaving coffee on their porches in sympathy. I'd told her the neighbors could mind their own business, which always made her laugh. I pulled out the usual Sunday collection, a grocery circular, an electric bill, a Christmas catalog for a company I'd never ordered from. And then at the bottom of the small stack, a white envelope with the return address of Dayton Cognitive Health Center printed in neat blue letters across the top left corner. I stood at the end of the driveway in my bathrobe holding that envelope while the December wind pushed at my collar. My fingers had gone cold. Not from the temperature. I opened it right there. "Dear Mr. Richard Lawson, a cognitive wellness evaluation has been scheduled on your behalf by a family member concerned about your well-being. Your appointment is confirmed for Tuesday, December 10th at 10 a.m. Please call our office to confirm attendance or to arrange transportation if needed." I read it twice. Then I folded it along its original crease and carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table and put the kettle on, because I needed something to do with my hands, while my mind caught up with what my body already understood. I called the center when they opened at 9. The woman who answered was pleasant and unhurried, the kind of voice that works well in a medical office, warm without being familiar. "Yes, Mr. Lawson, I do have you in our system. The appointment was scheduled on Thursday, December 5th. The same day, I'd canceled Ethan's card and sent the $1 transfer. The referring family member is listed as Ethan Lawson, your son. What reason did he give for the referral?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. My free hand was pressed flat on the kitchen table, fingers spread like I was trying to keep it from floating away. I heard the soft click of a keyboard. The intake notes indicate another pause. reported instances of the patient forgetting familiar routes, making unusual financial decisions, and exhibiting what the referring party described as paranoid behavior, including changing household locks without cause and refusing entry to immediate family. The kettle began to whistle. I didn't move to take it off. Sending $1 to my son, that was an unusual financial decision. Changing the locks on my own house after discovering that my son had altered my banking information without my knowledge, that was paranoid behavior. Standing at my own door and declining to let in 2 people who had just spent a week publicly humiliating me, that was refusing entry to immediate family. Every single thing I had done to protect myself was being written down as evidence that I needed to be protected from myself. I took the kettle off the heat. I poured the water. I sat down at the table and held the mug in both hands, letting the heat work into my palms, because the rest of me had gone very cold. Here is what I knew about guardianship proceedings in Ohio, because Martin had explained it to me once in a different context years ago, when a client of his was dealing with an aging parent to obtain legal guardianship over another adult, meaning the court takes away that person's right to make their own financial and personal decisions. You first need medical documentation, suggesting the person lacks capacity. You get that documentation by having them evaluated. Then you file a petition with the probate court. A judge reviews it. If the evidence is compelling enough, they appoint a guardian. It is not a fast process. It is not a guaranteed process. But it starts with a piece of paper from a doctor's office, and someone had just tried to start that paper. My chest ached with a dull, heavy pressure that had nothing to do with my heart and everything to do with it. Not rage. Rage was too clean, too simple for what I was feeling. This was something older and more complicated. The feeling of a man who has spent 68 years trying to be a decent person, a reliable person, the kind of person his word meant something, and is now sitting in his kitchen reading documentation designed to convince a court that he is none of those things. I called Martin at 9:45. He picked up on the second ring. Martin. I told him about the letter. Flat and factual, the way he'd always taught me to present information. When I finished, there was a brief quiet on the line, the quiet of a man thinking fast and organizing what he's thinking. Okay, he said. This is serious, Richard, but it's not insurmountable. One evaluation request from a family member doesn't establish incapacity, not even close. But, and his voice took on the weight of a word that carries real freight, it does mean someone is starting to build a record, and we need to get ahead of it. How? You come in tomorrow morning, and we go through everything from the beginning. The email changed the $1 transfer, all of it. I want the full picture before we make any moves. A pause. And Richard, don't go to that appointment. Don't respond to their office at all until we've spoken. Can you do that? Yes, I said. Good. Another brief pause, and then almost quietly. There's something else I want to look into before we meet. Something I found this morning when I was reviewing the cosigner documentation you sent me. I want to verify it before I say anything. His voice was careful in a way that made my stomach turn over. Come in at 9. We'll talk through all of it. I said I would. I thanked him. I put the phone down. Outside, the Sunday neighborhood was going about its Sunday business, a car backing slowly down a driveway, a kid on a bicycle wobbling along the sidewalk, smoke curling from the chimney, 2 houses over. The world entirely indifferent to the fact that someone had spent the last week building a case document by document that Richard Lawson of Maple Ridge Road was no longer capable of running his own life. I looked at the letter on the kitchen table one more time. Then I put it in the folder with everything else. Tomorrow morning, Martin had something to show me, and the way he'd said it, I want to verify it before I say anything, told me that whatever it was It was going to change the shape of everything I thought I already understood. Before I tell you what the bank found that morning, something I still can barely believe I saw with my own eyes. Please drop the number 9 in the comments below so I know you're still here with me. Every single one of those numbers reminds me that this story doesn't belong to me alone. And before we go any further, I want to be straight with you. Some of what you're about to hear has been reconstructed and fictionalized to protect the people involved. If you're looking for a story that is 100% true word for word, I completely understand. You can stop right here, and there's no shame in knowing what you came for. Martin Greaves has a way of arranging his desk before a difficult conversation. He clears it not all the way, but enough. Moves his coffee to the left corner, aligns whatever folder he's working from parallel to the edge, and then folds his hands on top of it and waits for you to sit down before he says anything at all. In 11 years of working with him, I had learned that the cleaner the desk, the more serious what was about to come out of his mouth. Monday morning, his desk was very clean. "Before we start," I said, hanging my coat on the hook by the door, "I want to know how you got what you're about to show me." "Helen called me Friday afternoon," he said, "after your visit to the bank. She'd found something in the system that she felt was outside her authority to handle alone, but she didn't feel comfortable ignoring it either." He opened the folder. "She sent me a copy through the proper interinstitutional channel. I spent the weekend verifying what it was. And..." He turned the folder around and pushed it across the desk toward me. It was a loan application. A refinancing request on the Oakwood Heights property, the house I had co-signed 4 years ago, the house Ethan and Chloe lived in. The application was dated November 29th, the Friday after Thanksgiving. The same morning, Connor had called me on FaceTime to ask if I was feeling better. The primary borrower was Ethan Lawson. The co-signer, the person whose agreement made the whole thing possible, was listed as Richard Lawson. The loan amount was $85,000 above the existing mortgage balance. I leaned forward and looked at the signature line at the bottom of the last page. The handwriting looked like mine the way a photograph of a person looks like the person close enough to recognize, different enough if you knew what to look for to know it wasn't real. The pen pressure was wrong. The loop on the capital R was too deliberate, like someone who had practiced it but hadn't lived with it for 68 years. "That's not my signature," I said. My voice came out flat and absolutely certain. "I know," Martin said. "The address, phone number, and email on the co-signer line also don't match your actual information. They match the fabricated contact details that were entered into the bank's co-signer portal." I sat back in the chair. The heat in the office suddenly felt like too much, like the thermostat was set 3 degrees too high for the size of the room. I pressed 2 fingers against the side of my jaw and breathed. "When was this submitted?" I asked. Martin checked his notes. "November 29th, 5 days before Ethan called you about the mortgage arrears." 5 days. I turned that over in my mind, the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath it. "So they submitted this first," I said slowly, "and then called me about the 18,000. That's the sequence, yes." The room settled around that fact for a moment. And then the shape of it became clear, not all at once, but the way an image develops in a dark room, details emerging from nothing into something undeniable. They had tried to get my forged signature on an $85,000 loan first. The refinancing application was already in the system waiting for bank verification. But the fraud detection team at First Horizon required direct in-person confirmation from the co-signer before releasing funds on a refinancing of this size. So the application stalled. Then they called me about the 18,000. Not because they were desperate about the mortgage, because they needed to know if I was still the kind of man who transferred money without asking questions. They were testing whether I was still manageable, Whether the version of me that had quietly written checks for 7 years was still the version they were dealing with. I had answered that question with $1 and a changed lock. Martin. My voice was steady, but my hands resting on my knees under the edge of the desk were pressing hard against my own legs. This is fraud, federal bank fraud, forgery. It is, he said, plainly, without drama. And it is serious. The application has not been funded. The in-person verification requirement stopped it. But the submission itself is a crime. He folded his hands. Here's what I'd like to do this afternoon, if you're willing. I'd like us to go to First Horizon together. You file a formal report of unauthorized use of your identity, and we request the application be flagged and frozen. Helen has already indicated she'll cooperate fully. Yes, I said. Let's do that. We drove separately and met in the First Horizon parking lot at 2 in the afternoon. Helen was waiting for us at the side entrance she'd told the branch manager in advance, and we were taken to a private conference room rather than sitting at a public desk. Smart. Discreet. Helen walked us through what she'd found step by step, her voice careful and measured, her eyes moving between Martin and me the way a person's eyes move when they're making sure everyone in the room understands what they're being told. The IP address associated with the online submission, she said, sliding a printed log across the table, traces to the residential router registered to the Oakwood Heights address. The submission was made at 11:14 p.m. on November 29th. I thought of Chloe at 11 o'clock at night in the house I had helped buy, submitting documents with my name on them, while I sat in my living room with no idea any of this was happening. My stomach turned over slow and cold. I signed the fraud report. Martin filed the supporting documentation. Helen placed a permanent notation on my cosigner record requiring biometric verification for any future changes. Before we left, she looked at me across the conference table with an expression that was more personal than professional. Richard, she said quietly. Whoever provided the signature sample, they had access to something old. A document you'd signed years ago. The imitation is good enough that it fooled the initial intake review. She paused. Someone close to you gave them that sample. I drove home slowly, both hands on the wheel, thinking about who had access to old documents with my signature. Old tax records. Old cosigner paperwork from years ago. Things that lived in filing cabinets in homes where I had once been welcome. I needed to talk to Ethan. Not by phone, in person. And I already knew what I was going to ask him. I called Ethan that evening and asked him to meet me for lunch the next day. Not at the house neutral ground, I said. A diner on Salem Avenue that we used to go to together back when he was in high school and thought his father understood everything about everything and was only slightly embarrassed to be seen with me in public. He hesitated for a long moment. Then he said yes. I got there first. Took the corner booth in the back, the one with the vinyl seat, that had been patched with electrical tape since at least 2009, ordered coffee and waited. The place smelled the way it always had, grilled onions and burnt toast, and something indefinably like the 1980s. I had always found it comforting. I was not sure I found it comforting today. Ethan came through the door at 12:15. He looked like a man who had not slept well in several days, a thinness around his eyes, a tension in his jaw that didn't ease when he sat down across from me. He ordered coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug, the way people do when they're cold, even though the room isn't cold. Thanks for coming, I said. He looked up. Something moved across his face, not quite guilt, not quite relief, but something in the neighborhood of both. Yeah, he cleared his throat. Of course. I did not open with the document. I waited. Let him settle. Let the coffee cool slightly. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my coat and placed the copied loan application on the table between us, face up, signature line visible. Ethan looked down at it. The color left his face so completely and so quickly that I reached forward instinctively, the way you reach towards someone who looks like they might fall, before I caught myself and pulled my hand back. "Where did you get that?" he said. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "The bank found it," I said. "It was submitted November 29th, 5 days before you called me about the mortgage payment." Ethan stared at the page. His jaw moved once-twice like he was trying to find a sentence that fit what he was looking at, and coming up empty every time. "Ethan." I kept my voice quiet and direct, no anger in it, because anger wasn't going to get me what I needed, which was the truth. "Is that my signature?" "No," he said, barely audible. "It's not." "Did you know about this document before today?" A long pause. His hands tightened around the coffee mug until his knuckles went pale. "No, I didn't know about the 85,000. I swear to you, Dad, I did not know what she was submitting." "But you gave her something," I said. "Helen told me the signature is good enough to have passed initial review. Whoever made it had access to an old sample, a real one." I watched his face. "Did you give Chloe copies of my identification old documents with my signature?" Ethan closed his eyes. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead, grinding it there like he was trying to push something back. When he opened his eyes again, they were red at the rims, wet and ashamed. "She said the bank needed to verify the co-signer's identity for a routine extension," he said. "She said they needed a copy of your ID and a signature sample from existing documents to cross-reference. She said it was standard procedure." His voice cracked on the last two words. "I took photos of the old paperwork from the filing cabinet. Your driver's license copy. The original co-signer agreement from 4 years ago." My chest tightened like something was winding down inside it, slow and deliberate. I breathed through it. "Did you read what she did with those documents?" I asked. "No." The word came out broken like it had been dropped from a height. "I didn't ask. I didn't look. She told me it was routine and I—" He stopped, pressed his lips together hard. "I didn't look, Dad." I sat with that for a moment. The diner went on around us, a waitress refilling a table nearby, the cook calling something back to the counter, the ordinary Tuesday noise of a place where ordinary things happened. "I need you to understand something," I said finally. "I'm not saying you designed this. I don't think you understood what you were handing her." I held his gaze. "But Ethan, there is a difference between not knowing and choosing not to know. You handed over documents about me with my name and my identity on them to someone who then used them to forge my signature on a federal loan application. The fact that you didn't read what she was going to do with them." I exhaled slowly. "That's not innocence. That's a choice you made." His eyes filled. He blinked hard, jaw working, and for a moment I thought he might cry openly right there in the corner booth with the patched vinyl seat. He pressed both fists against his mouth instead, breathing through his nose, getting himself under control in that particular way men do when they've been taught that falling apart in public is not permitted. "What are you going to do?" he said. His voice was raw and scraped down to nothing. "I'm going to protect what's mine," I said, "the way I should have done a long time ago." I picked up the document and slid it back into my coat. "What you need to think about, Ethan, is what you're going to do. Because whatever Chloe built, she didn't build it alone. She had help." I left enough on the table to cover both coffees and stood up. Ethan was still sitting there, both hands wrapped around a mug that had gone completely cold, staring at the table. At the door, I stopped and turned back once. "I still love you," I said. "That part hasn't changed. But love and accountability aren't the same thing. You're going to have to figure out which one you're more comfortable living with." I walked out into the December afternoon. Behind me, I had a son sitting in a diner with a choice he hadn't finished making yet. Ahead of me, I still had a question Helen had raised that morning, one I hadn't been able to shake since she said it. Where had all that mortgage money actually gone? Helen called before I'd finished my second cup of coffee Wednesday morning. "Can you come in?" she said. "There's something I need to walk you through in person. I'd rather not put it in writing yet." That last sentence, "I'd rather not put it in writing yet," told me everything about the weight of what she'd found. I was in the car 15 minutes later. Her office felt smaller than usual when I arrived, or maybe it was just the documents spread across her desk that made the air feel tighter. She closed the door behind me and went straight to it the way Helen always did, no small talk, no easing, and just the facts laid out in the order they needed to be understood. "When you filed the fraud report Monday," she said, settling into her chair, "it authorized our compliance team to review the transaction history associated with the mortgage account and any linked accounts that touched the loan. Standard procedure in an active fraud investigation." She turned her monitor slightly so I could see a column of figures without being able to read the account holder details. "What we found is not what I expected." "Tell me," I said. Every month for the past 8 months, the mortgage payment was transferred from Ethan's household budget account to a personal account under Chloe's name, consistently on time, the right amount. She paused to let that settle. That money never reached First Horizon. Instead, within 48 hours of each transfer, Chloe's account sent the funds to a business account registered to a limited liability company called Bright Horizon Media. She slid a printed page across the desk. "The Ohio Secretary of State registration for Bright Horizon Media, LC, a matter of public record, available to anyone who looked. Filed 18 months ago. Listed business activity, digital marketing, and social media consulting. Registered agent and sole member Derek Sloan, with an address in the Belmont neighborhood of Dayton. Total transferred to Bright Horizon Media over 8 months," Helen said, "is $46,200. The number landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. $46,200. Not spent on groceries, not blown on vacations, not run up on credit cards the way young couples sometimes do. Transferred, deliberately, to a company." "Has Bright Horizon Media provided any services to Ethan and Chloe?" I asked. "Contracts, invoices, anything on file?" "Nothing." Helen's voice was dry and precise. "No documentation of any services rendered has been submitted in connection with these transfers." I wrote down the name Derek Sloan on the small notepad I'd started carrying in my coat pocket 3 weeks ago. I had filled more pages of that notepad than I cared to count. "Do you know who he is?" Helen asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I'm going to find out." I thanked her and drove across town to the Dayton Metro Main Library on Main Street. Not my computer at home, not my phone. The library's public terminals, because a man who has spent 3 weeks discovering how carefully someone has been watching his accounts does not leave search trails where they can be found. I pulled up the Ohio Secretary of State business search first. Bright Horizon Media active registration, no violations on record, no lawsuits filed. Then I searched Derek Sloan's name through the publicly available court records portal. One minor civil dispute from 4 years ago, already resolved. Nothing recent. Nothing that suggested a man receiving $46,000 in unexplained transfers. Then I looked for him on social media using the library's guest login. His profile was sparse, a handful of posts, the most recent from 2 months ago, a photo of him at what looked like a community cookout. He was maybe 32, 33. Ordinary looking. Nothing about his appearance or his posts suggested someone living on $46,000 in under-the-table transfers. His most recent update was a brief note saying his consulting business was going through some restructuring, and he appreciated people's patience. I sat back in the library chair, and looked at the ceiling for a moment. A man receiving that kind of money does not post about restructuring. A man receiving that kind of money does not look like Derek Sloan looked in those photos, tired, a little rumpled. Someone keeping a low profile rather than someone enjoying a windfall. The money was going to Derek Sloan, but it wasn't staying with Derek Sloan, which meant someone else was at the end of that chain. And Derek Sloan was somewhere in the middle of it, not by choice, I was beginning to suspect, but by necessity. I drove home with the heater running, and the radio off, turning that over in my mind. The December sky had gone the deep flat gray of late afternoon by the time I pulled into my driveway. I made myself a bowl of soup, ate it standing at the counter, and tried to think about what I was missing. I was still standing there rinsing the bowl when the knock came at the front door. Not the aggressive pounding I had heard from Ethan and Chloe a week ago. This was different. 3 measured knocks spaced evenly, the kind that asked rather than demanded. I looked through the peephole, and what I saw on my porch made me hold very still for a full 5 seconds before I reached for the deadbolt. Standing in the cold December evening, looking 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him, was Charles Whitmore, Chloe's father. I had met Charles Whitmore 3 times before that evening. Once at Ethan and Chloe's engagement dinner, where he'd shaken my hand with the firm, appraising grip of a man who sized people up quickly and filed them somewhere permanent. Once at the wedding briefly, in the receiving line, where our conversation had lasted roughly 40 seconds. And once at a birthday party for Connor 2 years ago, where we'd stood near the same table for 10 minutes, making the particular small talk of 2 men who share a grandchild and almost nothing else. He was 63 years old, trim, the kind of man who wore good clothes without making them the point. Tonight, standing on my porch, in a navy blazer that had been slept in or traveled in, or both, he looked like someone who had been carrying something heavy for longer than he wanted to admit. I opened the door. "Mr. Lawson," he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered it. "I'm sorry to come without calling. I wasn't sure you'd answer if I did." I stepped back from the door. "Come in, Charles." He came in slowly, looking around the front hallway, the way people do when they're in someone's home for the first time, not nosily, just taking in the fact of it, the ordinary evidence of a life. He noticed the framed photos on the wall, the coat hooks, the small table by the door, where I kept my keys and my mail. "It feels comfortable," he said. Something in his voice when he said it made me think he meant more than the decor. "Sit down," I said. "I'll make coffee." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where Ethan had delivered every piece of bad news I'd received in the past 3 weeks. I set 2 mugs between us and waited. Charles wrapped both hands around his mug and looked into it for a moment. Then he looked up at me with the direct, slightly painful gaze of a man who has rehearsed what he's about to say, and is now discovering that rehearsal doesn't make it easier. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "and an apology, though I'm aware the apology is probably too small for what's happened." He set his mug down. "Derek Sloan called me last week. He told me what Chloe had been using his name for and what she had threatened him with to keep him quiet. When he said your name, I knew I couldn't sit on this any longer." "Tell me what you know," I said. He exhaled. "Derek Sloan. You've found his name by now, I assume." I kept my expression neutral. "I have. Derek was Chloe's boyfriend in college, before she met Ethan. They stayed in touch, not romantically, or at least..." He paused, tightened his jaw. "Not as far as I know. About 2 years ago, Chloe approached him about registering a business in his name. She told him it was a consulting venture, that she'd handle everything operationally, and that he'd receive a small management fee for letting her use his name on the LLC. His hands tightened around the mug. What he didn't understand at first was what the business was actually being used for. And when he did understand, I asked. Charles set his mug down. By then, she had enough on him. Derek had signed documents willingly at the time that he didn't fully read. Some of them contained financial representations that weren't accurate. Not criminal in his mind, just optimistic business filings. But Chloe had copies. His voice dropped. She told him that if he stopped cooperating, she would report him to the IRS for fraudulent business filings. She said she had documentation that would make it look much worse than it was. She was blackmailing him, I said. The word came out flat and precise because that was exactly what it was. Under Ohio law and federal statute, using a threat of criminal exposure to compel someone to act against their will is extortion a felony. I didn't say that out loud yet, but I filed it. Yes, Charles met my eyes. She was. He reached into his inside coat pocket and placed a small USB drive on the table between us. There are emails on this, copies of transaction records, correspondence between Chloe and Derek going back 18 months. He kept his fingertips on it for a moment before sliding it toward me. I've been holding on to this for 6 weeks. I didn't know what to do with it. I looked at the drive but didn't pick it up yet. Why are you bringing it to me now? Charles was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone rough at the edges, like something abraded. Because I made a mistake 4 years ago. Chloe got into some trouble with a business filing a smaller thing, nothing like this. She came to me panicking, and I helped her make it go away. I thought I was protecting her. He pressed his lips together. I think I taught her that consequences were negotiable. That if she got into trouble, someone would step in and fix it. His jaw moved. I taught her the wrong lesson. And now you're sitting across from me at this table, and I can see exactly what that lesson has cost you. The kitchen was very quiet around those words. Outside, the December wind moved against the window glass. I looked at Charles Whitmore, a man I had never particularly known. A man whose daughter had spent the last 3 weeks systematically trying to dismantle my life, and I tried to determine what I was looking at. Genuine remorse or a father trying to manage the fallout of his own culpability. I reached out and picked up the USB drive, turned it over in my fingers. Charles, I said carefully, is there anything on this drive that redirects the primary responsibility toward Ethan rather than Chloe? A pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is a long time when someone is deciding whether to answer honestly. The documents I selected are the ones I found most relevant, he said, which was not the same as saying no. I put the USB drive in my shirt pocket. I'm going to have this reviewed by my attorney and by the bank's compliance team before I use anything on it. I looked at him steadily. If what's here is what you say it is, it matters. But I need to verify it independently. Charles nodded, and the nod had the quality of a man who had expected exactly that and respected it. He stood to go, and I walked him to the front door. On the porch, he paused and turned back. The cold air moved between us. Chloe loves Ethan, he said, in her way, but she has never loved anyone more than she loves what having the right life looks like from the outside. He pulled his coat tighter. I hope you stay well, Richard. I genuinely do. I watched his car until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table with the USB drive next to my coffee mug and my notepad open to a fresh page. I called Martin. He picked up on the second ring, listened to everything I told him without interrupting, and said, "Don't plug it into anything yet. I'll have someone check it tomorrow." Then he said, "Richard, one more thing. Helen called me this afternoon. There's something about that Thanksgiving dinner guest list that I think you need to hear." The guest list. I had forgotten entirely about the guest list. Whatever it contained, I realized it was going to reframe everything I thought I already understood about the night this all began. Helen called Friday afternoon while I was making a pot of coffee I probably didn't need. I had slept poorly the night before, not because of bad dreams, but because my mind had kept turning over the same question Charles had left behind when he walked out my front door. What else don't I know yet? I picked up before the second ring. The IT team finished reviewing the drive last night, Helen said, skipping the pleasantries the way she always did when something was pressing. Most of what's on it is consistent with what we already have from the transaction records. The emails between Chloe and Derek check out dates, content, the pattern of instructions. A pause. But there are 3 documents where the metadata was altered. Creation dates don't match the content. I'd flag those before using them in any legal proceeding. Martin already knows, I said. He's having someone verify independently. Good. She exhaled, not relief exactly, but the sound of a woman who has been holding something and is now able to set it down carefully. There's something else. Something that wasn't about the financial records at all. Another pause longer. Richard, do you know a man named Douglas Farrell? I turned the name over. No, he's an estate planning attorney. Practices in Centerville. Specializes in elder law guardianship petitions, conservatorship filings, that kind of work. She let that sit for exactly 1 second before continuing. His name appears on the Thanksgiving dinner guest list that was in Chloe's email correspondence on the drive. Along with a Dr. Patricia Wynn, she's a neurologist, who has testified in guardianship capacity evaluations in Montgomery County at least 4 times in the past 6 years. The coffee maker finished its cycle behind me. The sound of it seemed very far away. Both of them were at the dinner, I said. Not a question. Both of them were at the dinner, Helen confirmed. And there's an email Chloe sent to Douglas Farrell 2 days before Thanksgiving. I'm going to read you the relevant portion. I heard the click of her keyboard. She wrote, Douglas, looking forward to having you and Patricia at dinner Thursday. As we discussed, Richard has declined our invitations to family events on several occasions recently and has become increasingly difficult to engage. His behavior has been erratic, and he's been isolating himself. I think Thursday will give you both a chance to get a sense of what we've been dealing with firsthand. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic edge bit into my palm. She invited them on purpose, I said. My voice came out stripped down to almost nothing, quiet and flat, the way a man's voice gets when the anger underneath it is too large for the room. It appears so, Helen said carefully. And Richard, those 2 people have no reason to doubt what she told them. They attended a dinner. They met a group of people. They heard a host describe a family situation. They have no idea they were part of something deliberate. I pressed my free hand against the kitchen counter and held it there, feeling the cold tile under my palm, using it as an anchor. Here is what Chloe had done. She had sent a personal email inviting a specialized elder law attorney and a neurologist who evaluates mental capacity not to discuss my situation in the abstract, but to observe my absence. To hear her describe me in her own words as erratic and isolated and difficult. To become, without knowing it, potential witnesses who could later say under oath. Yes, I heard Chloe Lawson describe her father-in-law's declining condition. Yes, that was before any legal proceedings began. She hadn't needed me at the dinner. She had needed me away from the dinner. My exclusion wasn't the injury. It was the strategy. Helen. My voice came out rough-edged, scraped. The night of that dinner, she told her guests that I'd been invited and refused to come. The email to Farrell implies as much, Helen said. She used the phrase, declined our invitations, plural, as if there had been multiple attempts. My eyes burned fierce and sudden, and I blinked hard against it. Not tears, not quite, but the pressure behind them that comes when your body recognizes something your mind is still trying to refuse. 28 days ago, I had been standing in my kitchen making pumpkin pie and counting the hours until Thanksgiving. I had been excited, the quiet, private way I was always excited about seeing my grandchildren. And while I stood in that kitchen, the table I was not allowed to sit at was being arranged as a stage. The guests who would never meet me were being briefed on who I was, and my absence, which I had accepted without argument because I didn't want to cause a scene, was being written into a story I hadn't read. "Thank you, Helen," I said, "for all of it." "Be careful, Richard," she said. And the way she said it, not formally, not professionally, but the way one person says it to another, when they mean it, stayed with me long after I put the phone down. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I did not reach for the coffee. I looked at the place on the wall where Margaret's calendar used to hang, the one where she'd marked every birthday, every school event, every dentist appointment for 30 years, and I thought about the difference between a family and a performance of one. That evening, Martin called. "I've been going through the camera footage from your front door," he said. "The visits from early December. Richard, I need you to look at something specific from the 3rd. Can you pull it up on your end tonight?" "Yes," I said. "Good." A pause. "I think you're going to find it clarifying." He was not wrong. I pulled up the doorbell camera footage on my laptop Friday night and found the timestamp Martin had sent me. December 3rd. The afternoon Ethan had come to the door, not with Chloe this time, but alone to deliver the demand for $18,400 by phone while standing on my property. I had forgotten he'd been there that day. Or rather, I had remembered the phone call but not realized he'd come to the house at the same time he made it, pacing the porch, while I stood inside listening through the door without opening it. I watched the footage. Martin called at 9 Saturday morning while I was still in my bathrobe, with a second cup of coffee going cold on the desk beside me. "You found it," he said. "I found it," I said. In the footage, Ethan stood at the door for 11 minutes. His body language was the edgy, pacing kind, hands moving, weight, shifting, never still. But what Martin had flagged was something smaller and more specific. Twice in those 11 minutes, Ethan reached into the right breast pocket of his jacket, checked something, and adjusted the angle of his coat. The camera was a high-definition unit I'd installed 2 years back, and at the closest point when Ethan stepped up to knock, you could see with unmistakable clarity the thin rectangular glow of a phone screen active inside that pocket. A recording app. Running. "He came to the house to do it in person," Martin said. "The phone call you had that afternoon about the mortgage payment, he was conducting it while standing on your porch with his phone recording in his pocket." I set my coffee mug down. My hand was steady, but something behind my sternum had gone very tight and very cold. "He wanted the conversation on record," I said. "He wanted a specific kind of conversation on record," Martin said. "Think back to what he said on that call, Richard. The particular phrases he used." I thought back. "You don't remember what you signed, Dad. You don't understand how serious this is. You're not thinking clearly about what this means for the house." Every sentence had been constructed to provoke, to make me sound confused or to make me respond with anger that could be clipped and repurposed. A 68-year-old man shouting at his son about money, or stumbling over details, or losing his temper in a way that could be played for a doctor or a lawyer, and described as erratic behavior. "I hung up on him," I said. "You did," Martin said. "And before that, from everything I can hear in the audio, your voice is calm throughout. No confusion, no volatility, no statements that could be misrepresented." A pause. "Richard, I think your instinct to stay controlled saved you from something significant. They needed a specific kind of recording, and they didn't get it." I thought of Margaret. She used to tell me that my calm in a crisis was equal parts virtue and stubbornness, and she was never entirely sure which one was operating at any given moment. I had never particularly cared which it was. It had always gotten me through the job. "So what does Chloe do now?" I asked. "When the recording doesn't give her what she needs?" Martin's voice was measured and deliberate. "She escalates to something she can control more directly. She can't control what you say on a phone call, but she might try to control the circumstances instead." A pause waited. "Richard, I want you to do something before you drive anywhere this week. Check your car. Not casually, I mean get under it or take it to someone who knows what they're looking at." I felt something cold move through me. You think someone might have tampered with it. I think when one plan fails, people who have invested this much in an outcome don't stop planning. They just change their method. His voice was careful, not alarmist, the voice of a man presenting a precaution, not a certainty. "The garage, you changed the house locks, but did you change the garage keypad code?" I stared at the wall. I had not changed this garage keypad code. The old code, the one Ethan had known for 6 years, was still active. I had replaced every lock on the house and forgotten entirely about the one entry point that didn't use a key. "No," I said. "I didn't." "Change it today," Martin said. "And Monday morning get the car looked at before you go anywhere." After we hung up, I went out to the garage and changed the keypad code, standing in the cold concrete space with my breath making small clouds in the air. I rested my hand on the hood of my truck for a moment, the reliable old Ford I had driven for 9 years, the one Margaret used to complain about, because the passenger seat heater had stopped working and she was always cold. My hand was not quite steady. I thought about what it would mean if someone had been in here. If someone had opened this garage with a code they no longer had any right to use and put their hands on something I depended on to move through the world safely. I thought about what Chloe had said on my porch the previous Friday. "You haven't won anything. You've just made this harder than it needed to be." She had said it like a forecast. Monday morning, I drove slowly to Joe Harlan's shop on Wilmington Pike. Joe had been my mechanic for 12 years. He was not a dramatic man. He did not exaggerate. So when he came out from under the chassis 40 minutes later and stood up and looked at me without saying anything for a long moment, before he spoke, I knew that whatever he had found, it was not good news. Joe Harlan has been my mechanic for 12 years. He's a compact, methodical man in his mid-50s who runs his shop the way good tradespeople run everything quietly, without drama, with an attention to detail that other people mistake for slowness until they realize nothing he touches ever has to come back. He's told me twice in 12 years that something was seriously wrong with my vehicle. Both times he was right. Both times his face looked like it did now, standing in the open bay of his Wilmington Pike shop on a cold Monday morning, wiping his hands on a rag that didn't need wiping, looking at me the way a doctor looks at a patient. Before he says the words the patient already knows are coming. "Richard," he said, "come here and let me show you something." He walked me under the lift. The truck hung above us in the fluorescent light undercarriage, exposed, all its private mechanics visible the way a thing is only visible when it's been raised off the ground and stripped of its dignity. Joe pointed to the rear left wheel assembly. "You see this line here?" He indicated a thin metal pipe running along the frame, connected at both ends to fittings that should have been snug and immovable. "Brake fluid line. It feeds hydraulic pressure to the rear left caliper. Without pressure, that wheel doesn't stop when you ask it to." "I can see," I said. "The fitting at the upper junction here." He touched it with one finger, not pulling or adjusting, just indicating, has been backed off. Not all the way. Maybe a quarter turn, maybe a little more. Enough that the seal is compromised. You lose fluid slowly, not immediately. After a few miles of normal driving, pressure drops. By the time you're at highway speed and need the brakes hard, you'd have about 60% of your normal stopping power. He looked at me steadily. "Maybe less." Is this the kind of thing that happens on its own? I asked, though I already knew the answer, and so did he. Joe shook his head slowly. Fittings don't back themselves off. Not on a truck this age, not with this maintenance history. Someone put a wrench on this and turned it. He kept his voice level, not accusatory, not dramatic, just the plain technical assessment of a man who had spent 30 years knowing the difference between wear and interference. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. They didn't cut the line or crack the fitting that would be obvious immediately. They just loosened it enough to cause a slow failure. Something that could be written off as a coincidence. Or old age. Old age. The words landed somewhere specific and cold. I stepped back from under the lift and pressed my back against the wall of the bay. My hands were not shaking. I made a point of checking. They weren't. But somewhere in the center of my chest, something had gone very tight and very still, the way a house goes still in the seconds before a storm arrives. I'm going to need you to document this, I said. Photographs, your written assessment, whatever you can put on paper. Don't fix it yet. Leave it exactly as it is for now. Joe looked at me with the careful attention of someone who has just understood that this conversation is larger than a vehicle repair. You know what happened to it, he said. I have a suspicion, I said, and I need to make some calls. I stepped outside into the December cold and called Martin first. He listened without interrupting, asked 3 questions. When was the last time someone else had access to the garage? What exactly did Joe find, and had I already filed the vandalism report and then said, call the police first, report the tampering, get a case number, then call me back? I called Dayton PD from the parking lot. An officer came to the shop within the hour, took down Joe's assessment, photographed the brake line, and opened a report. Criminal damaging, potentially aggravated, if intent to harm could be established. The officer was thorough and careful, and made no promises, which I respected. While she was finishing her report, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Carroll. She was a retired school teacher who had lived directly across from me for 14 years, and who had installed a wide-angle security camera on her garage after a car break-in 2 years ago. I had helped her mount the bracket. I knew exactly what angle it covered. Of course, she said immediately when I explained what I needed. I'll pull the footage right now. She called back in 20 minutes. Her camera had captured the front of my garage clearly. On the evening of December 8th, 4 days ago, a figure had approached my garage door at 8:17 p.m. and entered after about 15 seconds at the keypad. The figure was wearing a dark jacket with the hood up, but the build, the height, and the particular way the person walked were, she said carefully, consistent with someone she recognized as Ethan from previous visits to my house over the years. The figure had exited 9 minutes later, carrying a cardboard box. 9 minutes. Long enough to retrieve a box from the storage shelf. Long enough to do something else as well. I called Ethan. He picked up on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting for a call he wasn't sure was coming. Were you at my house Sunday evening? I asked. No preamble, no softening, a pause. Then, Chloe asked me to pick up a box of old tax documents. She said they were in your garage storage. She said you wouldn't mind. Did you touch my truck? No. His voice was immediate and tight. Dad. I went in, I found the box on the second shelf, and I left. I didn't go near the truck. I didn't even look at it. The brake line on the rear left wheel was deliberately loosened, Ethan. I kept my voice flat and factual. If I had driven that truck at highway speed, without knowing, I could have been seriously hurt, or worse. The silence on his end stretched long enough that I could hear his breathing change, a sharp inhale, then something that sounded like the controlled exhale of a man fighting to keep himself from falling apart. Dad, he said. His voice had gone raw. I didn't touch the truck. I swear to you, I would never, I couldn't. He stopped. Started again. I went in and I got the box, that's all I did. The camera across the street shows you inside for 9 minutes, Ojai said. The box was on the second shelf, and I had to move some things to get to it. That's why it took time. His voice cracked at the edges. Dad, I am telling you the truth. I didn't touch your truck. I looked at my own hands standing in the parking lot of Joe's shop. The cold had gotten into my fingers while I wasn't paying attention. Then someone else did, I said. While you were in there or before or after. But the code was yours to know Ethan. I'd changed every lock on the house and I forgot the garage and you had that code for 6 years. I exhaled. Whether you touched that truck or not, the door was open because of you. He didn't answer. I heard something that might have been a muffled sound. Something swallowed and suppressed the sound of a man who has finally encountered a consequence he can't talk his way past. I hung up. Filed the report with the officer. Drove home slowly, windows down, despite the cold, listening to the sound of everything working the way it was supposed to. That evening, Martin called. The police report is filed. Good. Now, Richard, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. I've been going back through the original paperwork from when you co-signed the mortgage 4 years ago. All the way back to the beginning. A pause. There's something in there I think you may have forgotten. Something Margaret made you do before you wrote that check. I stood in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and felt something shift at the base of my chest, not dread this time. Something older and quieter than that. Margaret. Even now, even still. I'll be there at 9, I said. Martin's office on Tuesday morning smelled the way it always did, old paper and fresh coffee, and the faint dry warmth of a building that has been heated the same way since approximately 1987. He had a file open on his desk when I arrived. Not the fraud report file, not the USB documentation, not the mortgage delinquency records. Something older. Thinner. A manila folder that looked like it had been sitting undisturbed in storage for 4 years. He pushed it across the desk as I sat down. But before you signed the co-signer agreement on Ethan's mortgage, Martin said, do you remember what else we processed that same week, you and Margaret, both of you in this office? I looked at the folder but didn't open it yet. I was reaching back through 4 years of ordinary life, the particular week before Ethan and Chloe closed on the Oakwood Heights house, the week Margaret had been between her 3rd and 4th chemotherapy cycles and was still well enough to drive herself here. She wanted to make sure the money was documented, I said slowly. She didn't want it to be a gift. She wanted it to be a loan. That's right. Martin folded his hands. Margaret was very specific about that. She said, he checked his notes, and the careful way he did it told me he had written it down at the time because she had said it in a way worth preserving, that she didn't want Ethan to forget the sacrifice, that if it was a gift, it would disappear into the furniture and the mortgage and be forgotten inside a year. But a loan alone was something you honored. My throat tightened until swallowing took real effort. We drew up a family loan agreement, Martin continued. $120,000, zero interest, repayable over 20 years in modest monthly installments. Ethan signed it. You signed it. Margaret signed it as a witness because she wanted her name on the document. He paused. And then she asked me to do one more thing. She asked me to file a lien against the property. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. A second lien. Recorded at the Montgomery County Recorder's Office. Richard Lawson, lien holder. $120,000 secured against the Oakwood Heights property. Filed 4 years ago, 3 weeks before Ethan and Chloe moved in. In Ohio and in most states, a lien on a property means that the lien holder must be paid before the property can be refinanced, sold, or transferred, clear of encumbrance. The mortgage lender, First Horizon, held the primary lien, the largest one, the one that had to be satisfied first in any transaction. But in second position, right behind them, was my name. $120,000, secured, legal, recorded. I stared at the document. The signature lines at the bottom, Martin's neat notarization, Ethan's signature, and then Margaret's name written in the particular careful cursive she used when she was writing something she considered important. A few weeks before she passed. She had known she was running out of time, and she had used some of what was left to do this. My eyes burned so fierce and sudden, I had to press 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and hold them there. "She never told me," I said. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "She told me she didn't want you to think about it as a financial protection," Martin said quietly. "She said if you thought about it that way, you'd feel like you were being suspicious of Ethan. She wanted you to just love your son and let the paperwork do the protecting." He paused. Her words. I pressed my lips together hard. Let the feeling move through me the way feelings move through you when you let them, not fighting it, not performing it, just letting it be what it was. Margaret. Even from wherever she was, even 4 years after she'd gone, still putting herself between me and the things that could hurt me. "Martin," I got my voice back under control, mostly. "Tell me what this means, in plain language." "It means that Chloe could not refinance that property, could not pull equity out of it, could not sell it and walk away with the proceeds, not without satisfying your lien first. $120,000 would have to come to you before Ethan and Chloe could see $1 of whatever equity remained." He met my eyes steadily. "The current estimated equity in that property after the mortgage balance is approximately $230,000. Your lien sits first in line for 120 of that." I looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. "The forged signature on the refinancing application," I said. "It wasn't just to borrow more money." "No," Martin said. "It was to release the lien. A refinancing application requires all lien holders to sign off to formally release their security interest, so the new loan can be processed clean. Without your signature releasing this lien, the refinancing couldn't close. Ethan and Chloe couldn't access the equity. They couldn't borrow against it. They couldn't do anything with it." He paused. "That's what they needed your signature for. Not just as a cosigner, as the lien holder standing between them and $230,000. The room settled into that fact. I felt it arrange itself around me, every piece of the last 3 weeks clicking into a new configuration, like a set of old gears finally catching the teeth they were meant to enjoy. The email change at the bank so I wouldn't know the mortgage was failing. The test call about $18,000. The forged signature. The cognitive evaluation. The recording attempt. The break line. All of it. Every step of it. Not a series of rash decisions made by people in financial panic. A sequence. A deliberate, patient sequence aimed at one thing. Margaret's name on that lien document. "She knew," I said, softly. "Not to Martin specifically. Just to the room, to the quiet, to whatever it is you talk to when the person you most want to talk to isn't there anymore. She knew something like this was possible. She planned for it." Martin looked at the folder for a moment, and when he looked back up, his expression had something in it that was beyond professional. The look of a man who had known both of us well enough and long enough to understand what he was watching. "She was the most practical woman I ever worked with," he said, "and one of the most quietly fierce." I almost smiled. It hurt, and it didn't, both at once, the way things do when love and loss are occupying the exact same space. I left Martin's office an hour later with copies of everything: the lien document, the family loan agreement, the recorder's stamp, Margaret's signature. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and the heater running and my eyes on the road. That evening, Ethan called. His voice was different from any version of it I had heard in the past 3 weeks. Not angry, not calculating, not performing, just tired. The tired of a man who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and is beginning to wonder if he can put it down. "Dad," he said, "can we meet just us? No lawyers, no just us." A pause. "I have something I need to show you. Something on my phone." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I think it's time I told you the truth. All of it." I looked at Margaret's photo on the mantel. I thought about what she would tell me. "When and where?" I said. The Salem Avenue diner was quieter than usual on a Wednesday noon, just the low clatter of plates from the kitchen, a country station playing softly from a speaker near the register, and the smell of burnt coffee and something like home. I got there first. Same corner booth as before, same patched vinyl, same view of the door. Ethan came in at 12:10. He looked like a man who had not slept in 4 days and had stopped pretending otherwise. The circles under his eyes were deep and bruised-looking. His jacket was wrinkled in the way that said he'd slept in it or hadn't slept at all. He sat down across from me and didn't reach for the menu. "Thanks for coming," he said. His voice was raw, stripped down to something I hadn't heard from him in years, something that sounded almost like the Ethan who used to call me after a hard day just to talk. "You said you had something to show me," I said. He nodded. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the table between us, unlocked it, opened his messages, and slid it across to me. "Read it," he said. "All of it. Start from October." I picked up the phone. What I read over the next 4 minutes made my chest ache, with a pain that was equal parts grief and fury. Message after message from Chloe. Instructions, requests, demands, dressed up as suggestions. "Can you take a photo of your dad's driver's license? The bank needs it for verification." Then, did you sign the extension paperwork I left on the counter? Don't read the whole thing. It's just routine. Then 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I've invited Douglas Farrell for dinner. Don't mention anything about Richard's finances to him. Just let me handle the conversation if it comes up. And then in late November, a message that made the skin on the back of my neck go cold. "The garage code is still 4471, right. I need to get something from storage next week." I set the phone down on the table. My hands were very steady. I made a point of that. "Ethan," I said, "I need you to walk me through what you knew and when." And he did. Haltingly at first, then faster, like a man who has been holding his breath for weeks and has finally decided the only way forward is to exhale completely. He told me about the documents he'd signed without reading. He told me about the conversations he'd half heard and chosen not to follow up on. He told me about the morning Chloe had asked him to call me about the mortgage, had told him exactly what to say, had coached him on the phrases, "You don't remember what you signed. You don't understand the situation," as if it were a script. His eyes were wet and red-rimmed by the time he finished. His jaw was working hard, the way a man's jaw works when he's fighting something back that he doesn't want to lose in public. "I knew something was wrong," he said, voice cracking. "I knew it. And I kept telling myself I was reading too much into things, that she was just stressed, that it would get better." He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. "I let her use me, Dad. I let her use me against you." I looked at my son across the table. This man I had carried home from the hospital 38 years ago, this man I had taught to ride a bicycle and change a tire and read a blueprint, and I felt something inside me break open and ache the way a bone aches when it begins to heal. I need you to send me these messages, I said, or give Martin direct access to this phone. What's on here matters. I know. His voice was barely above a whisper. I'll do whatever you need. I'll talk to Martin. I'll sign whatever. His phone, still lying on the table between us, lit up. Ethan looked down. His face changed so completely and so rapidly that I felt the shift before I saw it. Something went out behind his eyes, like a lamp switched off at the wall. He picked up the phone with a hand that was no longer steady and stared at the screen. I could see enough from where I sat. A photograph. Connor and Lily, my grandchildren, sitting in the back seat of a car, both of them smiling at whoever was taking the picture, oblivious to everything. Below the photo, a line of text I could not read from this distance. Ethan read it again. And then something in him, the thing that had been open and raw and almost brave for the last 20 minutes, closed itself up like a wound that refuses to stay clean. I can't, he said. The words came out broken and flat at the same time. I'm sorry, Dad. I can't do this. Ethan. He was already standing. His chair scraped back hard against the floor. She has the kids. Do you understand? She has the kids with her right now, and if I... He stopped, pressed both hands flat on the table, breathing. Then he straightened up and looked at me with the eyes of a man choosing and hating himself for what he was choosing. I'm sorry. Forget everything I said. He turned and walked toward the door so fast his jacket caught the edge of the table. I heard something hit the floor, watched him keep walking without stopping, without looking back the way people move when they are running from something they cannot outrun. After the door closed, I looked down. His phone had slid off the table and landed face down on the floor beside my foot, left in the panic of a man who had moved too fast to remember what was in his hands. I did not touch it. I picked up my own phone and called Martin. He walked out, I said. But he left his phone on the table. It has everything on it, Martin. Everything. A pause. Then, don't touch it. I'm sending someone right now. Stay with it until they arrive. Another pause, shorter. Richard, this might be exactly what we needed. I sat with the phone until Martin's paralegal arrived 40 minutes later, documented it, and took it away in a sealed evidence bag. Then I drove home in the early dark of a December afternoon, both hands on the wheel, and told myself that the last piece had just fallen into place. Martin sent a paralegal to the diner with a sealed evidence bag and a chain of custody form, which was exactly the right way to do it, and exactly why I had called him, instead of touching the phone myself. Thursday morning, I sat in his office while a forensic IT specialist he'd contracted, a quiet man in his 40s named Briggs, who spoke only to Martin, and only when necessary went through Ethan's device with the kind of focus that makes a room feel smaller. Ethan had provided the passcode, voluntarily by phone at 7 in the morning when Martin called him. That single fact that Ethan had picked up and given the code without being asked twice told me something I filed quietly away. The message thread between Chloe and Ethan is extensive, Briggs said, not looking up from his laptop. Goes back 14 months. Instructions, financial directives, coaching on what to say to the bank. To Richard. He scrolled. There's also a secondary thread. Outgoing from Chloe's number to an unlisted contact. The content is... He paused, reading operational. Martin looked at me. This is the thread we need, Richard. Tell him what you're looking for. Anything about the vehicle, I said. The brake line. Briggs scrolled for less than 30 seconds. Then he stopped. November 30, he said. Chloe's number to the unlisted contact. The message reads, the Ford is in the second garage stall. Left rear brake line. Make it look like wear not damage. You know what I need it for. The debt goes away when it's done. The room went very quiet. I pressed the heel of my hand against the edge of the table and held it there. My jaw was tight. My eyes burned with a heat that had nowhere to go. I had driven that truck for 9 years. I had driven Connor to school in that truck when Ethan and Chloe were running late. I had driven Margaret to her last appointment in that truck because she said the height of the seat made her feel less like a patient and more like a person. And someone had put instructions in a text message to have its brake line loosened. Casually. The way you'd text someone a grocery list. "The unlisted number," Martin said to Briggs. "Can you trace it? Already cross-referencing." A pause. "It's registered to a prepaid carrier, but the device MEI connects to purchase records that match a name already in your investigation file." He looked at Martin. "Someone associated with Bright Horizon Media." Martin nodded. He turned to me. "The police report from Joe Harlan's shop combined with this thread gives us criminal damaging with intent. Potentially aggravated given the circumstances." He paused. "And it establishes a direct line from Chloe to the act." That afternoon, the detectives who had taken my vandalism report received the new evidence. They contacted Chloe for a formal interview. Martin called me at 4:30. She told them Ethan orchestrated everything, he said. That she was pressured, that she signed documents he put in front of her, that she didn't understand what she was agreeing to. His voice was level, not surprised. She had the story ready. "And Ethan?" I asked. "Ethan," Martin said, and something in how he said the name made me hold my breath, provided his full cooperation. He walked them through the message thread, confirmed his own role, and did not attempt to shift responsibility for his part in it. A pause. He also confirmed that the brake line message was Chloe's initiative, that he had no knowledge of it. Another pause. "Richard, for what it's worth, I've been doing this for 34 years. When someone cooperates the way he cooperated today, they've made a decision they won't walk back from." I thanked him. Put the phone down. Outside my kitchen window, the first snow of winter was falling. Not dramatically, just the quiet, tentative kind, the flakes that aren't sure yet if they're going to stay. December in Dayton. Margaret used to stand at this same window when the first snow came and say that it meant the year was finally putting things to rest. I filled the kettle. Not for coffee. Margaret had always said coffee after 5 o'clock was a choice you made and then apologized for later. I made tea. I stood at the counter while it steeped and looked out at the snow coming down over the bare maple tree and the quiet street and the house that had always been mine, that had never stopped being mine, that someone had spent months trying to take from me one forged signature at a time. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel relieved. What I felt was something simpler and older than either of those things, the feeling of a man who has done what needed to be done and is now for the first time in a very long time simply standing in his own kitchen without being afraid of what comes next. Ethan had chosen the truth. Late, painfully, at a cost that was going to follow him for years, but he had chosen it. I thought about Margaret's name on that lean document. I thought about her handwriting, careful and deliberate, signing something she knew I would need long after she was gone. I thought about the fact that she had done it quietly, without telling me, because she had known I would have told her not to bother. She had bothered anyway, because that was who she was. I picked up my tea. Outside, the snow was starting to stick. There was still a long road ahead. The investigation, the legal proceedings, the slow dismantling of everything Chloe had built. There was Ethan to reckon with, not tonight, not this week, but eventually. There were Connor and Lily to think about, 2 children caught in the wreckage of choices they had no part in making. But tonight, for the first time since the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, I was just a man standing in his kitchen watching the first snow of winter come down. And that for now was enough. A year has passed since that Thanksgiving. Chloe is facing charges. Ethan is working 2 jobs, paying back what he owes and rebuilding something I'm not sure either of us can name yet. Connor and Lily still call me on weekends. That part at least held. I used the money from Margaret's lien, the money she quietly protected for me before she left, to set up an education trust for my grandchildren. The rest went toward a free trade apprenticeship program for young people in Dayton who need a hand up, not a handout. I taught electrical work for 31 years. Turns out, I'm not done teaching. People ask me if this is a revenge stories family situation. I always say the same thing: no. Revenge would have meant spending years making people suffer. What I did was simpler. I stopped enabling. I let consequences arrive. There's a difference, and it matters. I'm not a perfect man. I enabled too long, gave too easily, and confused generosity with boundaries more times than I care to count. If your family only remembers your phone number when they need money, that's not love. That's a transaction. Don't wait as long as I did to understand that. I believe God gives us the wisdom to protect what we've been entrusted with. Sometimes that wisdom arrives through the people we love. Sometimes it arrives through a document a dying woman quietly signed before she let go. Family justice doesn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like a changed lock and $1 and the courage to stop pretending everything is fine. These revenge stories, family, remind us that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're the only language some people understand. And family justice begins the moment you decide your dignity is non-negotiable. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you've been, leave a comment below. Your words might be exactly what a stranger needs to read today. Share this if it reached you. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, you know what to do. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. And one final note: some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements constructed for the purpose of reflection and education. If that's not the kind of content you're looking for, that's completely okay. Step away and find what speaks to you. No hard feelings and no judgment. But if you're still here, welcome. You're exactly the kind of person these revenge stories family were made for. And family justice always starts with one honest choice.